Tell us that we'll never make it out, but I know that you're the one. Together we can face tomorrow. We're gonna run, 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 run away. Yeah, we're running
What's up, hackers? Welcome to Chill Code. My name is Taggart, and tonight we're resuming our normal Wednesday programming after Hack Summer. What we're going to be doing tonight is taking on the basics of web development. This is for anybody who wants to get into programming for the web, or anybody who wants to understand from a security perspective what's going on behind the scenes. In a previous life, I was a web developer, so I don't hate JavaScript, which is kind of a hot take, I guess. I actually think it's kind of neat, and understanding how applications are built for the web can be a really huge asset if you're interested in web app pen testing, or even if you work in an environment or an organization that's building custom web apps, so you understand how they're getting built and how they can go wrong. So we're going to start, real simply here. We're going to start by just creating the basic 3 files that you would need to build a web application that is fully featured, right? Using all the features of the modern web. And I'm going to be using very basic tools. You can use more complicated things. I'm just noticing my Chiron's wrong. Let me fix that. Much better. Okay. Yeah, so you can use complicated tools. You can use really heavy IDEs or even Visual Studio Code, and I certainly have used Visual Studio Code a lot in my past career. But for today, I'm going to show you that all you need is Vim, and use some of that Vim knowledge that we gained during Hack Summer. So we'll start there. And do we need to do anything else? Not really. More about my setup. Basically, all I have going right now is I'm on a Windows machine, but I have Windows Subsystem for Linux, and that's where I'm going to be doing my development. Why? Because, especially for web development, a Unix-like environment is just miles better than a Windows environment. All of the command line tools, all of the developer helpers have really been built with, if not, Mac OS probably in mind, but certainly a Unix-like command line in mind. So I have found that there is no better web development environment than a Linux machine. So rather than go through the trouble of create a Linux VM just to do this, I have WSL set up. It has pretty much everything that I need on here. So let's get started. I'm going to start here by just creating our starter page, right, which is going to be index.html. And use touch index.html. And I am going to split my window top and bottom because I want to be able to have my text editor up pretty much the whole time, but then I want to have a command line access as well. So I'm going to just use tmux here and split my window. That's fun. There we go. And so I'll have a little command line window down at the bottom here, and I'll have my text editor up at the top. If I was using my full screen, I could, split this up a few different other ways, but this will work for now. All right, so I'm going to vim index.html now that I've created it. And I'll begin with just creating a basic structure. If you've never written any HTML, this can be a little bit intimidating, but all pages follow the same basic structure. And in fact, to show you that, let me go to my website, which is, all things considered, fairly simple, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So we're going to go ahead and click View Page Source, or choose Control-U or Command-U if you're on a Mac. And we'll zoom that in so it's a little bit easier to see. So every HTML file begins with a doc type HTML. You actually don't need it, but it's a good idea to have it in there. And then we have these tags that follow this kind of tree structure. And you can see that we begin with an HTML tag, and then inside of that is a head, then some other stuff. And then there's a body tag. And then if we come all the way down to the bottom, we end with these /body/HTML. So components, elements of your document are defined by these tags. Now, tags can also have these extra attributes inside the tag, but mainly we're talking about these tags. And so we're going to build out the basic document structure with those tags here in Vim. So I'm going to start with HTML, and I guess I don't have my autocomplete running, but that's fine. And then I will run head and body. And then stuff goes inside of them. That's kind of it. And I will throw a couple of things in here just so we can have something to start with. So inside of my head, I'm going to... Now, head doesn't show up in the browser. Head is metadata and other information that the browser uses, but it doesn't render on the page. But there is something that does change an immediate appearance, and that's the title of the page. So we're going to change the title here to... So used to writing H1, I wrote H1. All right, so you can kind of see how this gets structured now. And it's a lot to read at first, but over time you get used to kind of just cutting through all these tags. And then in our body, we're going to add just a simple H1 tag. And we'll close the H1 tag. H1s are first level headings. Think of those as like your top level title. There are 6 levels of defined headings in HTML, but generally speaking, if you've gone past 3 or 4, you've gone mad. You have to do something else to change how your document is structured. But this is good for now. All right, so we'll go ahead and, well, let me add that doc type. Again, it renders without it, but will be semantic. And we'll add that HTML up there. It used to be that you'd have to put the HTML version, but ever since HTML5, you don't have to do that. You just kind of throw that on there. All right, and we'll save our file. And then over in our browser, we're gonna... Oh, wild. I wonder if this is gonna work. Because I did something dumb, didn't I? I put this in a place where Windows can't see it. 1 second while I relocate this folder. There we go. Much better. All right. Let's try that again. So now that I have it in a place that Windows can easily see it, let me go. So e-learning, there's web demo, and we'll just open up index.html. And that's it. It doesn't look particularly good. It has this, well, maybe if you like Times New Roman, it does, but it's not particularly interesting. It looks like it was written in, you know, the mid-90s, because that was before we had cool styling or, you know, modern design sensibilities. There are still web pages around that look like that. When we were doing the bash scripting, I sent you all to the TLDP bash tutorial, and if you actually visited it, you saw a web page that looked essentially just like this, right? No styling whatsoever, just raw HTML. In fact, let's look at the source for this. Yeah, it's pure. It's got tables in it for some weird reason, but other than that, yeah, it's very, very unfussy HTML. I have a soft spot in my heart for sites like this. Whenever I see this, I'm thinking, oh, this is a graybeard who couldn't be bothered with aesthetics, but probably has some good wisdom to pass on. All right, so we have ourselves, you know, an H1 here. Let's add a couple more elements just to get comfortable with the idea of elements. And if you're interested in learning all of the HTML elements, I recommend checking them out at w3schools.com. And let's go to the HTML tag reference. Yeah, this is everything. Right, so we can make links, we can make articles, and some of these are very HTML5, very modern things, but we'll play with some of this in a minute. Because our objective today is we're going to make a game. We're going to make a rock, paper, scissors game that works in the browser. But in order to do that, we have to, you know, get started with the basics. So let's add some more elements here. Let's add a paragraph. So if I end the paragraph and I make another p tag, I'll have 2 paragraphs. Right? And then I just reload the page. Now, again, modern development tools, you can have auto reloads and previews and all that stuff is possible in VS Code. But again, this is very, very basic, right? I've just got a text editor and a browser to see my results. And this is actually one of the reasons why I love teaching web development, because the payoff is instantaneous, right? You can see what you've done right away. And even for very young students, this is super rewarding and really easy to get started with. Let's add a little bit of flavor here. So let's style a little bit. Let's embolden the word second with a bold. You see it got a little bit heavier there. Oh, also I misspelled paragraph. All right. That is how that works. Now, let's add a little bit more flavor to it here. This is, of course, how HTML basically works. We've kind of covered the basic idea. Now we have to add the second leg of the 3-legged stool that makes up modern web development, or you can think of it as the holy trinity of web development. We have HTML, which is the document that gets rendered by the browser and essentially is the foundation for everything that you're going to be doing. Then you have CSS, which is the language cascading style sheets, the language which styles everything. It also can do some animations, some cool stuff, but basically it's the appearance governor of your page. You can also do inline styles, but I specifically want to create 3 different files to demonstrate how that works. And then JavaScript, which is going to be the last and longest thing that we cover tonight. But for now, let's first talk a little bit about how styling works. So I can add style tags anywhere in the document. So if I put them in the head, inside of the style tags, I will be using a different language entirely. I won't be using HTML anymore. I will be using CSS. Let's go to the CSS reference. There we go. And there's a lot to learn about CSS. We won't cover it all tonight, but basically the idea is you create you target a tag, and then inside of semicolons you create a rule for it. So for example, I could say color red, and there are several predefined colors like a Crayola box, but you could also do RGB or other color codes for it. And notice the semicolon at the end of the rule. So let's save that out and then reload our page, and now you can see that of course our H1 is red. If I change this, let's make a paragraph rule. So if I made a paragraph rule and said, let's say that the background is black and the color is white, both of our paragraphs will be styled exactly like that. And if it's a tag, I can style it, basically. So I could also add a body here, and let's say background black. And then I can even add a global color of white. And even if I take away this color rule for that text, it will inherit, because that rule will filter down as far as it can go. And now I'm making what the Maddox site, I guess, the greatest site in the universe. It's not particularly pleasing. So we can soften this a little bit if we want to do some more modern sensibilities. Let's go grab our, actually, let me show you one of my favorite tools, color.hailpixel is a palette generator for the web. It's the coolest thing. So let's pick a nice soft background color. That seems good. And then let's choose some highlight colors. I like it. It's very ocean. And then we'll choose one more. A 3-color palette. Lovely. So what we've done here is we've been able to capture these colors, and then we'll make those our background. And I gotta put a hashtag at the beginning of that. And then the color, I need a gray. I need a dark text color. And this isn't the best for choosing text colors. So the other color tool that you can choose is uses the color picker on Google. Real easy, right? I'll throw it into the blue range and then just choose one of these grays. A dark slate gray, not 100% black. Yeah, that looks good. We'll try that as our text color. And then instead of red for our H1, we'll make it this magenta-y situation. It's very beachy. Very synthwave, which is appropriate for our situation here. And there we go. Let's see how that all looks. Much gentler, I think we'd agree. Maybe not the most modern, but it's fine. Now, what if I wanted all of this text to be inside of like a teal zone? What I would do is I would use a div to contain both of those paragraphs. And the div is just sort of an arbitrary division of the document. And so I can group my elements using divs. And you'll see this all the time in actual websites. So we'll make a div. And the div here after the second paragraph. And just for sensibility, I will indent my 2 paragraph tags. Now, here's the problem. I don't know how many divs I'm going to make, but I know that I want to identify this one specifically, or at least this kind of div. So I'm going to give this div a class, and we'll call it cool text. Why not? That's how I add attributes to my tags in HTML. And then up here in my CSS, I address it a little bit differently. So rather than add a paragraph rule, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rule for the class cool text. And I target that class with a dot. Now, any div that has that class will receive this styling. And so what you're going to see is that this entire zone containing both of these paragraph tags will have that color, so that this space will disappear, this white space will disappear. Okay. And I don't love the fact that my text is running all the way to the edge, so I can add a little bit more styling. All right, let's say padding. So we can add padding, which is the internal spacing between the next internal element and the outside, or the inside wall, basically, of that element. So let's do 5 pixels all around. 5 pixels all around, so it's not touching the edge anymore. Right, that's a little bit nicer, but it was very heavy. You can see that it took a lot off the top. And if we want to know why that's true, right? If we want to know why it's so big, we can use the inspector in Chrome to see what's going on. You can see these colors, and you maybe have seen these colors before, but didn't know what was going on if you're looking at the inspector. What you're looking at here is the box model of the element, and the orange lines is the margin between the text, the element, and the things above and below it, or to the sides. The green, yeah, it'll show you the box model here. So the green is the padding, and then there could be a border and a margin. That's the box model. So you can see that padding is in there. But then if you want to know why there's all this extra space, if we look at the paragraph tag, you can see it has this massive margin. Well, I don't need it to have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a styling for paragraphs, and I'm going to get rid of that margin. And if we look at the reference for margin, there are a couple of different ways to define a margin. We can say, we can go all around, clockwise, top, right, bottom, left, or we can specifically use margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left, or we can do this double situation, which does top, bottom, left, right. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave, so I'm going to say my margin top and bottom is going to be 3 pixels. And my left and right, because I don't need any extra space because I'm already doing the padding, right, is going to be 0 pixels. So this should shrink the space. Yeah. Now, that's not really enough space, as far as I'm concerned, between the paragraphs. So if I wanted to modify that further, I would say, okay, 3 pixels. I could either leave it this way and then specifically say margin bottom, which would override the bottom, and say 5 pixels. Right? That makes that a little bit bigger. Or 7. Pixels. Let's just be explicit with it then. So 3 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the bottom, or on the right, 10 pixels on the bottom, and 0 pixels on the left. That should, yeah, there we go. That takes care of that. All right, so we have some very, very, very basic styling, and you can inline it, obviously, inside these style tags, but you can also put this in its own file. So I'm going to use Vim. I'm going to open up a tab, and I'm going to edit, call it index.css rather than index.html. And I'm going to just take this entire section using my visual mode, and I'm going to cut it. Head over to my CSS page and paste it in. It took all that indentation, so I'm going to move that out. Okay, so now I have a CSS page. I can get rid of these 2 style tags. And that cleans that up quite a bit, right? But I still need to connect the 2 pages. So how do I do that? I'm going to use a link tag. Coming back over to the HTML reference, we can see that this is basically exactly what the link tag is used for. It used to be used for some other stuff, but pretty much it's used for CSS links these days. So link, the relationship type is style sheet. That tells the browser what to do with this thing. And the href is going to be index.css. And sure enough, my styling doesn't disappear. I've reloaded it. My styling doesn't disappear because that link is working. So I have my styling working the way that I want. All right. Now, if you want, you can use the W3 Schools reference. I really like the cssreference.io. This is my preferred page for looking up CSS whenever I need it. Especially for weird stuff like Flexbox or any other crazy things you can do with layout. You can do a lot with CSS. You can even do animation. You know what? Let's do some animation real quick. Why not? So what we'll do is we'll just do a color animation. And to do that, we're going to take this div of cool text and we're going to add a rule for cool text in the hover state, or the pseudo class of hover. And we'll say that in that particular case, the background turns to the title color. And what you'll see happen is that it'll occur instantaneously. What did I do wrong? Is it a single colon? Yeah, there it is. A single colon. So notice that when I move my mouse over it, this happens instantaneously. But if I wanted it to happen with a little bit of timing, I could add a transition. So that would look like this. If I add a transition to the basic div, I can say transition background 0.3 seconds. And let's copy that and put it also on the hover state so that it has an animation in both directions. Now, see how it's a little bit smoother, right? It looks like there's a fade. It's quick. 0.3 seconds is like what you can detect pretty much. If I made it 0.5 seconds, it would be very obvious. Right? Almost too long, right? It doesn't feel snappy anymore, which is why I prefer 0.3. Boop. In and out. And of course, we could add the same thing for our paragraph to change the color there as well. Now, the problem is that I'm targeting all paragraphs here with this rule, but I might not want to do that. So if I want it to be a little bit more specific, I want to say paragraphs inside of the cool text class. What I might say, I can create descending rules. So say inside of a cool text element, paragraphs will get this, like paragraph elements inside of the class cool text will get this rule. And then similarly, let's just copy this over and add a paragraph at the beginning of this. Let's get rid of the background because we don't need it. Oop, that key's in the wrong position. There we go. I forgot to change the color, didn't I? Of course I did. And change the color. We'll say the color is white when it's hovered. Or actually, no, it should be the color of the background, right? So that's it. And let's put that transition in there as well. And now we have this really nice color transition effect. Not complicated and not super well, I was about to say it's not super technical, but you know, here's the thing. This is the basics of CSS, but good CSS programmers are worth their weight in gold. I mean, they can absolutely make a page look incredible, just like this, right? All of this is working because CSS somebody took the time to do it in CSS. So don't underestimate this skill set, particularly if you can't do it. And I'm by no means a CSS expert. You know, I've done a little bit to get by. But, you know, people who do, like, there are people who do CSS art, which is kind of amazing. And not about to get on that level. But okay, now that we've played with CSS, it's time to add that third bar stool, which is JavaScript. And JavaScript is the programming language of the web. If you want to think about it this way, HTML is the structure, the foundation of our document. The CSS is the appearance, and then the JavaScript is the behavior of the application. It contains the logic of how things work and allows for not just animations, but also, connecting to APIs. Link Scars is next level. Yeah. Man, let me see if I can find it. I'll have to look for it. The most CSS I ever did was... Hey, Neon. Yes! So, but I think I put it on CodePen, and now I can't remember. Okay, apparently I don't remember where I did this, but it doesn't matter. Oh, you know what? I'll just clone it, and because index.html has it. So let me, yeah. This is the most, the coolest CSS I've ever done. Was to make a next-gen, UI library. I particularly like this toggle. This button, this is one of my favorites. This is a checkbox. And these are radio buttons. Anyway. CSS, learn you some. Now, we're moving on to JavaScript. So our objective tonight is to create a rock, paper, scissors game that works within the browser. So if you think about what we're going to need to do to make that happen, a number of different things. First of all, we're going to have to allow... even for one round, right? We'll leave multiple rounds off for a second, but even for one round of rock, paper, scissors, what do we have to do? We have to allow the player to choose rock, paper, or scissors. We have to allow the computer, let's say they're playing against the computer, to randomly select rock, paper, or scissors, and then we have to compare the choices and then determine a winner. Okay, so there's a lot of logic that has to go on, which is, I like rock, paper, scissors as a teaching game for that reason. And also, it's great for a web dev, from a web dev perspective, because you have to build a basic UI to allow that choice of rock, paper, or scissors. So, to do that, we're going to start understanding how JavaScript works and how JavaScript... A lot of people, let me back this up. When you do Codecademy, or you do a lot of these other, Learn to Program courses, even some boot camps... I'm going to change up the music for a second. If you do one of these code camps, often you're going to get this kind of weird intro to JavaScript where you're learning the syntax of the language, but without any context as to what you'd actually use it for. And that's very confusing to new learners because, you ostensibly started to learn how to program to make an app. these days that's generally what you're doing, unless you're in a computer science course and you have other aspirations. But people are like, I want to learn to code. Why? Well, I want to make an app, or I want to make my first game, or whatever. And so that final product, which is often very visual in nature, is totally abstracted from the thing who's like, well, this is how you make a variable. So I really like teaching JavaScript directly in the context of how it interacts with the document, the HTML that it will be interacting with. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we have to do is make our JavaScript page, or our JavaScript file. So we're going to make a new tab up in Vim. And we're going to do e-index.js. And very, very simply, we're going to do an alert. Just to prove that we have a connection between the JavaScript file and the index.html. So at the very bottom of the body, not after the end of the body, but at the very last thing before the end, we're going to add a script tag. Now, interestingly, I could actually just add the alert here. And an ending script tag. And we'll start like that. And alert just creates a pop-up, right? If you've ever seen us do any cross-site scripting or anything like that, you're familiar with alert. And sure enough, we get a pop-up when we reload the page. You can do inline scripts just like you can do inline styles, but generally that's not how you want to do it. Instead, you're going to want to separate that out into a second file. So to do that, we leave both the beginning and end script tags, but we're going to give the script tag a source attribute, src, and we're going to say index.js. They don't have to be index. The only magic file name in this case would be index.html. Because most web servers are configured to look for a file called either index.html or index.php and then load that. But then because that's the thing that the browser is loading, any of the other file names that you're linking here, you can name these whatever you wanted. They don't have to be indexed. I'm just doing this for consistency. Okay, so we've done this source, and if I reload the page, I should see another pop-up, and indeed I do. But that's not all that we can do with JavaScript. That's not super helpful. So instead, we're going to add a little bit of more interesting logic. Now, to start, we're going to... I'm going to show you a kind of basic idea, which is console.log. And hi there. So we're going to say console.log. Console.log is super important from a debugging perspective. Think of console.log as your print in Python. It is what you use to get text out of this thing without it messing with your actual page. So if I reload the page, nothing shows up here. But if I open up my inspector console, there's my console message. So I can use that to debug my page as I need to. I'm going to put this on the bottom, just so it's a little bit easier to see. All right, cool. So, what we're going to do first is we're going to have we're going to begin the relationship between JavaScript and document by understanding that the document object, there's something called the DOM, the document object model, but the document object is literally an object inside of the JavaScript language when you use it in the browser. And let's take a look at what the document is. So I notice that it's not in quotes. I'm asking for a variable, an object name that is defined. So when I reload this, you see I get this document thing. It's got this little arrow next to it. And I expand it. It has all these different properties, right? I'm looking at, how I would print out the document itself. But the document has other abilities. And in fact, if I type in the console here, if I say document dot, you can see it has all these other capabilities that we don't see if we just print it out like that. So, to give you an idea, if I wrote an instruction like document.location.href, and thank you very much, you complete me, is actually giving me my autocomplete in Vim, equals, if I write this instruction, and notice that I end my instructions with semicolons, and I reload the page, this page will load, but then instantaneously take me to my website. This is a really common practice if you were trying to use cross-site scripting maliciously. If you were trying to redirect somebody to a fake login page or something like that, this is how you might do it. Let's get rid of that line, because otherwise, if we don't get rid of that line, it'll just keep happening as we try to go back to the page. So instead, we're going to try something else that we can do with the document, which is document.write. And in this case, we're going to write an H1. Which is this is very raw. It's not at all how you would do this in real life, but I want to show you that you can do this. So what document.write will do is it writes arbitrary text to the document, but here's the thing. Much like opening a document in write mode in Python or another programming language, it will by default truncate existing data. So oh, I guess it doesn't. For whatever reason, I thought that document.write... Oh, right, because it was after everything else was written. So it actually does append, sorry, if you put it in the right spot. My bad. But notice that I'm getting this extra H1 here on my document, hello from JavaScript, that JavaScript created. So that's neat, but not necessarily how I would want to do this. The way that I would actually want to create the interaction between, if I wanted to create elements of the document with JavaScript, I would do it a little bit differently. And it's verbose, but you'll see why we do it this way. So to start, I would say I have to create a new variable. So we'll call it const, because it doesn't change. New heading equals document.createElement. And it just takes the name of the tag. Let's say H2. And then you can say new heading dot append child. And again, this is all kind of defined in the API for working with these things. A child is something that would be inside of it, inside of the document tree, just like we saw head and body were inside of the HTML tags. Now what we're going to add to the heading is the text that exists inside of the heading. And this is how it works. So append child, what are we appending? Pretty crazy like that we do it this way, but it works. Document.create text node, and I was made correctly inside of this. Now, if this seems stupidly verbose, you're not wrong. And then what we would do is say document.append, document.body.append child. Sorry. Nope, gotta do it this way. Document dot yeah, I'll do query selector. That's the way I usually like to do it. Is body dot append child new heading. So the query selector allows us to capture pieces of the document and use it in our code. document dot query selector body, see, returns the body. If I ask for an H1, it'll actually return the first H1. Now we have two in here, right? So if I used document dot query selector all, it produces a list, what's called a node list, which is like an array of all of the matches for that particular tag. And I use CSS selectors with this one. There are other ways of getting elements off of the document, but to standardize it, I like using query selector just because it's pretty modern, it's performant, and it makes sense for anybody who worked with jQuery back in the day. Notice that I am not saying you have, right now, we are not downloading any dependencies, right? We're not getting any CSS frameworks, we're not getting jQuery, we're definitely not using Angular, React, or Vue, or anything like that. Because what I'm trying to show you is you can make a functional web application without any dependencies. Yes, it looks a little bit more verbose, but you can do it. The reason we have those other frameworks is to get rid of some of that extra overhead. Okay, so we have this document.query selector that's appending the child. So this should be working now. Hey, Richie, yes, good to see you. So with this written, the hell there is. Oh, didn't need that semicolon. There we go. Okay, so you can see that an H2 was added, and of course, it says I was made correctly. It wasn't styled at all because we didn't put any styles in for the H2, but we certainly could, right? If we want to go back to our Hail Pixel, let's see if we can get like another color that would be good for H2s. Maybe a deeper blue. Something in that zone. I like that blue. Let's go with that. So again, we come back to our CSS page, color, and now when we reload the page, it's styled the way that we want it. By the way, if you're tired of looking at this serif font, we can do something about that. Let's, in our body, let's very quickly create a font family rule. And very basic, we'll just say sans serif. We can be more explicit with fonts, but let's just say sans serif for now. And now it's sans serif. If we said Helvetica or something like that, we can do Helvetica and then sans serif as a failback. I think it is Helvetica anyway. Is using query Neon asks, is using query selector any better than using something like document.getElements by tag name? I don't know if it's better, Neon. I think it's almost exactly the same in terms of performance. I have used both, right? There's document.getElement by ID and getElement by class, but that's the thing. If you use document.query selector, then the only thing that's changing is the parameter to the method, not the method that you're using. And so it makes, if you're doing this a lot, if you have to do this in a project, it's a lot more maintainable, I feel like, to just use query selector as a standard, because the document query selector API is like predictable, if that makes sense. And I would also say, because the thing, I'm pretty sure this is why they added document.query selector to ECMAScript. If you use query selector, it is a straight up find and replace if you're trying to surgically remove jQuery from a project, which I do whenever I get a chance. I was working on a project as a consultant like a year ago, and like everything was written in jQuery, which is fine, but it's added bloat to a project that isn't necessary. So I got rid of it just by using query selector and a few other things that are now built into the primary ECMAScript language without having to rely on a third-party dependency that was going to have to get updated, and it just adds bloat. All right. So this is how we create elements. It's kind of a lot, and that's often why we can write functions to abstract this out so we don't have to worry about it that much. So for example, let's write a function called add element. We'll say our add heading, right? Say text, and then we're gonna kind of copy this all out, or cut this and put it in here. We'll indent that, of course, and create text node. We're just gonna replace all this with text. And now we can do more to abstract this and make this useful. But now all I have to do is add heading, easy, right? And by the way, this is basically what React is doing behind the scenes, right? I mean, there's other stuff that it's doing with like the virtual DOM and understanding how to do diffing between renders. There's a lot more that it's doing, but in terms of adding stuff to the document, this is it, right? It's using the built-in JavaScript API, but then wrapping it in really, really handy, a handier API so that it's easy to work with in a semantic way. All right, so that's a very quick and dirty introduction to JavaScript. Let's build a thing with it. So we're gonna redo our index.html now, get rid of some of the stuff that we have. We'll leave the styling, but we're gonna turn this into a rock, paper, scissors game. RPS. And we'll write some instructions. Oops. I keep doing that. Visual mode, end of the line. There we go. Select your weapon. And now we're going to make a div, a separate div. Called choices. Or maybe choice buttons. Yeah, I think choice buttons is going to be descriptive for that. And then inside of that, we're going to add 3 buttons. Rock. Paper. Scissors. And let's clear out what we have in index.js here, just for a moment. I'll comment it out. So that it's not doing stuff. Okay, so notice we have our same styling applied because we just used the same tags and the same div for what we had before. But now we've got these 3 new buttons. They're not going to do anything because they're just buttons. And they're not that good looking, but they are buttons. They're styled as a browser would style buttons, which is fine for starters. We'll make it look cool later, but we want functionality first. So what's the functionality going to have to be? This is where we have to start thinking about the rock, paper, scissors game. We're going to start by thinking about a single round of rock, paper, scissors, and then we will iterate and learn how to do it for multiple rounds and keeping score, things like that. But for now, a single round of rock, paper, scissors is not super stateful. It doesn't have to keep track of much, but it does have to keep track of the player choice and the rules of the game. B7 leads with scissors. All right, if we ever play rock, paper, scissors, oh, now you're in my head, man, because you could have possibly told me that, and you actually always lead with rock, and I'll assume that you lead with scissors, and then I'll mess up. You're psyching me out. Thank you, though. Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Okay, so there's a trick that I use whenever I teach this, because I love asking students, and actually, before I give you the trick, chat, how do you think we might want to define the rules of rock, paper, scissors? And, for those of you who don't remember, right, paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, right? So how would you define that in code? And even if you don't know JavaScript, or you don't really have a programming background, think about how you might want to define that relationship. While you think about that and put it in chat, I'm going to add comments for the steps that we need to do. Irasakai says, if checks. Yeah, you could have what ends up being a pretty complicated series of conditional statements, nested conditionals to do it. All right, if player choice equals rock, and then if computer choice equals rock, paper, scissors, or actually, for those, if you do rock, paper, and then just an else, because there's only one other option. Yeah, you can definitely do it with nested ifs. Are there any others? Other suggestions? And this is how you do comments in JavaScript, of course, double slashes for single lines. We have to get the computer choice, and then determine a winner. Very simple. All right, well, let's talk about the rules of the game. Let's play with if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. Irasakai, the idea of nested conditionals, and we can kind of fudge this a little bit with some pseudocode. I'm so used to saying sudo for the command. Pseudocode. So we'll say, like, if player choice, which we haven't defined yet, equals rock, do a thing, right? Else if player choice equals paper, do a thing, else do another thing. And then, so there are 3 possibilities: rock, paper, and then we don't explicitly say scissors because that's the only other option. And then for each of those, we could do something like if computer choice equals rock, and basically duplicate that structure internally. That's definitely one way to do it. And you can kind of see that that gets pretty long. And there's a shortcut to doing this that I figured out that I think is pretty handy for this. And it takes advantage of the way that you can store data in JavaScript. So obviously, maybe not obviously, but let's get our console up here. So if I say I can create arrays, right, of rock, paper, scissors, that's an array in JavaScript, right? And I can access each one of those in turn if I index them with 0, 1, 2, right? And I also have another data structure, which is called an object, which, if you're used to Python, think of a dict. So I can say something like, imagine if I created an object like this. Say const beats equals, and then rock beats paper. Paper beats rock, and then scissors beats paper. Now, why is this cool? Imagine now if I get the player choice back from like the button, and I get paper back as the player choice, and then I define the computer choice. If I ask beats for the player choice, say the player chose rock, I can check to see if the computer choice matches what it beats, right? And if it does, the player wins. If not, I check the opposite to see if the computer choice matches what for beats what the player chose. And if it doesn't, the only other option is that it's tie, right? 3 options. The computer won, the player won, there's a tie. So I do 3 checks rather than 9 checks. That's the difference. And that's a really important, not that I am a computer science major, I was an English major, but I've kind of cobbled together an unofficial computer science education. This is kind of a really important concept in programming, which is, even though it's small scale, you're trading off computation for storage. Right? We are storing data, not a lot, but some. We're storing data rather than doing runtime computation. Make sense? And that allows us to run a little bit faster, and this is predictable. So it's a really easy way of storing the rules of the game. So this is usually how I teach students to do it. There may be other better ways. I'm certainly not the best rock, paper, scissors person. But I do find this fairly elegant. So I'm going to actually copy this over. Is that indentation the same? Cool, it is. And now we have to get the player choice. To do that, we have to now interact with the document again. And this is where we have to learn a new concept called event listeners. Event listeners are hooks onto parts of your document that listen for specific events. And by the way, developer.mozilla.org is, if you want to know how the web actually works, this is where you need to go. And very specifically, if we look at web technologies, there's web APIs. And I'm going to look for event listener. Yep, that's what I want. Lubdub, thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, so an event listener is a responder to predefined types of events that can occur in the browser. And, there are multiple different kinds of events that you can define. We're just going to use click. So in order to do this, I am going to we are going to make this a little bit easier by adding a class to our buttons. called class choice button. So I'm just going to add this to each of my buttons, and you'll see why I'm doing that in just a second. Oh man, I copied too much. There we go. So now I've got this class of choice button. Again, I can use that document.query selector to make this a little bit easier. But to show you how it works on a one-off, let me show you this. Let's do document.query selector h1. And that captures the element that I want to work with. And I don't have to save it in a variable because this is kind of a chain thing. I'm going to do .add event listener. And add event listener takes 2 arguments. You can see here. The first argument it takes is the event type, which is defined with predefined event strings, and this one is going to be click. And then the second argument that it takes is a very, very JavaScript idea, and it does take some people to get used to it. It does take people some time to get used to it, but what we're talking about is a callback function, meaning that it's the function that contains the logic that you want to occur when the event happens. And the reason that it's written in here, this is what we call an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name, is because it's not used anywhere else, so you don't really have to give it a name. You just have to put it in here so it has a function to execute. Here's the thing, though. This syntax is a little dated now. You don't have to use it. There's another syntax you can use, which is called the fat arrow syntax. And to show you what that looks like, we're going to do this. So we take the event, or E, and then the fat arrow, and then curly braces, which actually does matter for this fat arrow function, even though you can write some kinds of fat arrow functions without curlies. And then we will say alert. You've seen the parentheses around. What does the parentheses do exactly? Richie, do you mean like that? Nothing inside the parentheses, just empty parens? Okay, so the difference between the two things, that's a really good question. The difference between the two things is, I actually can do that for this one, and you'll see why. We'll just do an alert here. Say, I got clicked. So let's write that out, and so we're adding an event listener. Let's reload the page. And now when I click on this H1, the event fires off. But, hey, DevXman, thank you so much for the follow. Here's the thing. This is essentially a function with no arguments. That's what these empty parentheses are all about. It's a function that takes no arguments. But the click event generates what gets fed into this callback function is an event object. And I think that's a really important concept to understand. And to show you that, let's define E, or the event, right? And then we'll alert I got clicked. We'll do the same thing, but we're also going to console.log whatever that E thing is. What is that event? What is that event object that gets emitted by the click? So you can see what we have access to inside of that event. So we'll click this thing. I got clicked. And then look, I got something in my console. This pointer event. It has all this stuff inside of it that I have access to, right? I have my mouse position. I have the pointer type. I have all this data from the event. And if I want to use any of that data, I need to explicitly say that my callback function uses the parameter that is fed into the callback. That's the deal. And in particular, what I'm interested in usually is the target. Because the target has data. And I want that data. So for example, in form controls, very often you'll go after target.value, right? Because like a text field, that target.value is what contains what's inside the text field. And that is how JavaScript takes over the handling of form submissions from things like PHP or like the traditional form submission, like a post request that you're used to. JavaScript intercepts that and then manually grabs data out of input fields using those events. Okay, so we have an event handler, we have an event listener, and we have it on the H1. That's really not what we want to do though. So instead, we're gonna write a handler for our buttons, and it goes like this: document dot query selector all, and we're going to select all things that have the choice button class. That's right, yeah. Of course I didn't style it. Yeah, choice button class. It will style those soon, but and then very cool thing you can do with the choice button, the query selector all node list that comes back. A node list has a built-in method called for each. So I don't have to write a for loop per se. This is a little less performant than a proper for loop, but it's cleaner from a code perspective, so it's fine for now. So I have a built-in for each, so I'm going to chain that method off of my query selector all dot for each, and then again we're going to use that same fat arrow syntax, and we'll say b sorry. Yeah. That's right. So we have the button. We're going to say b.add event listener. And then here, it would be the event. By the way, when you have a single argument, you don't even need the parentheses. You can just do this. And then the fat arrow. Nice and clean. So we're going to do add event listener. And we're going to say const choice equals e dot target dot inner text dot to lower case. Yeah. And we will console.log player chose plus choice. This is a lot, but what we're doing is we're taking all three buttons and we're saying for each one of these, we're going to add an event listener. Oh, of course, I need to add an event type first, don't I? Click, then the callback function. And then we want the event because we want to get the target for it, and it has that inner text like we saw before on the H1 target. If we look up here, you see there's inner text, and I want that because I want to lowercase it to match what I have up here. All right, let's see if that works. Okay, I'm still console.logging that beats, which is why you're seeing that show up. But let's click on rock. It says player chose rock. Paper. Player chose paper. scissors, player chose scissors. So I have my click event working for all three. And look how easy it was to set up, right? Rather than doing kind of a contrived for loop or whatever, I was able to just grab all the elements from my DOM for each one of these, add an event listener. And because each one of these buttons has unique data in the event from the click, I can use that to create my unique response. Now, I have to get the computer choice. For this, I'm going to write a function. I'm going to say const choices equals, and one of the things that's interesting about objects just kidding, doesn't it? It's not keys. I'm totally blanking on how to do this in JavaScript. Look it up. There it is, entries. Wait, it is keys. Oh, it's object.keys. There we go. There we go. There we go. So if I want to get object.keys out of beats, it gives me an array of rock, paper, scissors. And that's exactly what I want. Object.keys of the beats variable, which is global in this case. And then I want to... Random integers are a little bit funny in JavaScript. What we need to do to make a random integer is... Well, let me show you. So if I wanted to do... I have math.random, right? And then I can do math.random if I wanted to get it to the right size, times like 3. But if I do math.floor, yeah. Times 4. Yeah, there we go. It actually, I do want it to be times 3 because it's 0, 1, 2, right? So that is how I do random integers in JavaScript. It's, you just kind of learn this invocation and you just use it. So we would say return, because we want to do this properly, return choices, and then for the index, we'll say math.floor. Right? And if we wanted to be a little bit more explicit about that, we could say const choice idx for index equals that. And then here, we're returning choices, choice idx. Okay. Yeah, and how that method of generating a random number is actually biased. It is. Hey, duct tape. Yeah. It's even more pseudo than most pseudo-random. But for our purposes here, it'll be fine. Duct tape's just here to watch me have to deal with JavaScript while he lives in his pristine C# glory. Just say random number generator to 4. Okay. So we have, what are we doing? So we've got computer choice. We're getting the player choice, right? What we'll do is call this player choice to be a little bit more verbose. And then const computer choice equals, choice. Yeah. We'll say computer choice. We'll rename this to get computer choice. And it doesn't matter, but I always like to put my dependent functions above the stuff that uses it. So I'm going to rearrange this just a bit and put that up here. And then we'll write the logic in this anonymous function, but you might see why we would later want to abstract it out. Let's take a look at this XKCD that Duct Tape is linked here. Very nice. I was reading an article about like how most pseudo-random number generators are fundamentally broken, and in particular ones on, I think it was ARM chips, are just like hosed. That we don't have even pseudo-randomness where we think we do. Which is, great. Fundamental parts of our computing reality are lies. That's what you want to hear. Okay, so we have our player choice, we have our computer choice. Time to compare them.
I can do a multi-level seminar on random number generation.
You should, Duct Tape. You're welcome, by the way, whenever you want. Hop in the voice chat. We'll do a guest session for you, and you can hold court. I want to start getting some guests on here anyway. I'm getting tired of my voice. I can imagine how all y'all are doing. All right, but thank you very much for the sub. We are going to DevXman, you're not late at all. We're creating a rock paper scissors game. You're right on time. So let me catch you up. What we have so far, Orbital, you are tempting fate. I replaced my, so for those of you who don't know what Orbital's talking about, I have had this issue with my router where at 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 47 seconds exactly, my stream will die. It'll come right back, but it dies exactly at that time. You can go back and check the old VODs. You can see that's how long the stream lasts. And it turns out that the Netgear Nighthawk R7000P has this really specific and totally unadmitted by Netgear bug that lots of people have written about on Reddit and their own support forums that has this issue, and no one really knows what's causing it. And it just seems to be this model. So, like, okay, fine. I have an older TP-Link router that works just fine, and so I replaced the Netgear with this, and hopefully, we're gonna get past the 2 hour, 3 minute, 47 second barrier tonight. It's not quite Chuck Yeager, but I'm excited about it. Okay, but yeah, so DevXman, so to catch you up, we are creating a rock, paper, scissors game. Very, very simple stuff. No, Duct Tape, it's not, like, it's what the logs say is that it's a SYN flood, but it's not. It's basically a firmware issue with the router. It could be. I guess it could be an integer overflow or something like that. Although it would be weird for just that kind of traffic. Who knows though? I'm not about to reverse the firmware to find out. Okay, so yeah, we're creating a rock, paper, scissors game. We have these 3 buttons here, and what you're looking at right here, DevXman, is the logic for those buttons so far. And basically, we're adding a click event to each one, where, and this should work even here, right? Player chose rock, player chose paper, player chose scissors. So we're getting the click event, and then we're pulling literally the text of the button out, lowercasing it, and that's how we're making it match what we have in our rules up here. What you're looking at here is this object that is a key value pairing that relates a game piece to the thing that it beats. And so if I ask for beats of paper, it'll tell me that paper beats rock. And similarly, if I ask for beats scissors, it'll tell me that scissors beats paper. So that's how I'm going to determine the winner of a round. All right, so we have our player choice and we have our computer choice. And we'll console.log out that as well, right? We're just doing this to check our logic. Computer chose, and then plus computer choice. Also notice that I need to change up this variable name because now it's player choice. Awesome. And now we have to determine the winner. This is where we do have to do some sort of conditional checking. There are 3 possibilities. And this is why I like doing it with the stored data here rather than a full out conditional. Because in this case, there are 3 possibilities. The player one, the computer one, or it was a tie. So we only have to do an if, else. That's it. It looks like this. If beats player choice is equal to, we'll do a full comparison, is equal to computer choice. We'll console.log. We'll add other stuff later, but console.log. Player victory. Else if beats. Oh, you're quite welcome. So what I'm here for equals player choice. You see how that reverses, right? So the first possibility is the player one, the second one is the computer one. Console.log. Computer victory. And then else. Console.log. It's a tie. Okay. Now, it's not going to be particularly exciting, but this should work. All right, so if I choose rock, it says player chose rock, computer chose paper. That's wrong. Player victory. Did I reverse the rules? I did. So this is, I love that this happened. The computer did exactly what I told it to. But the human element will always get you. I flipped the rules. Right? So rock doesn't beat paper, rock beats scissors. There we go. Let's try that again. Player chose rock, computer chose paper, computer victory. That seems like it's working. Let's try that again. Player chose paper, computer chose scissors, the computer wins. Player chose scissors, computer chose scissors, it's a tie. Tie, computer victory. So, our game is working. You do it. Now you know how to do this. Make your own. So terrible. Whenever I do this, or I play rock paper scissors or engage in RPS, I think about the worst movie, which was Volcano from, what is it, 97, with Tommy Lee Jones and Anne Hesh, because there's this scene like toward the end of the movie. The plot, by the way, is like there's a volcano in LA, so there's this thing where they're playing rock paper scissors and one kid goes like whoosh. He's like, what's that? He's like, it's not paper, it's lava. I don't know. It's what I think about every time. All right, so our game is working. It's not particularly cool, but it works. Now we get to do the extra fun work of keeping score. And also actually having the interface respond, because right now we're just console.logging. That's not particularly helpful. So let's create a div on our HTML. That's CSS. A div on our HTML for, we'll call it MySQL scoreboard. Now, those of you who know HTML a little bit will know that there's also an ID. You can add IDs to elements. And I'm not doing it because, generally speaking, unless it's definitely something there's going to be one of, you really don't want to use IDs anymore. It's not considered, good convention for your styling. That's why I'm making everything classes. Because, like, if there's one of them, cool, but if there happens to be more of them, that's also fine, right? It doesn't do any harm. So we use classes for most of our styling here rather than IDs. Okay, so we're going to do a class scoreboard. And we're going to create an H2. And we're going to give this a class of results banner. And that's what we're going to modify when there's a change for the gameplay. So this is going to be our announcement location. We'll do other stuff with it, but that's where we're going to start. To show you what that looks like, right, we'll keep the console.log for now, but we're also going to write a function called announce. With MSG, because who doesn't love a little MSG? Makes everything delicious. It's the message. So what we're gonna do is actually we're gonna save it for reasons which will become clear in a second. Const banner equals document.query selector, and again we're gonna use that class selector for results banner. And then we're gonna say banner dot clear, right? I am pretty sure. I want an HTML element. I can like let's see what methods we have in HTML elements. I swear there was a clear nodes or something like that. Oh, replace children. There you go. Yeah, there we go. So we'll say banner dot replace children. And what are we going to replace it with? We're going to replace children with a new list, or node list, of document.create text node MSG. And that should handle that. Announce player victory. And we're repeating ourselves a little bit here, but that's okay for now. And this is why you would want to abstract this out into a separate function, right? Because this is something you're going to do multiple times, right, with this announce, and I don't want that. I don't want all of that messing up my game logic, right? That's why I have that outside there. All right, let's reload that. Great. What did I do wrong? These can be DOM string or node objects. Ooh, can it just... Oh, is it not... I don't think you make it in a node list, or an array. I think you just... This spread operator means give it a bunch of stuff. So... Be comma separated? Yeah, there we go. Player victory. It's a tie. Player victory. So, hey, our we have a user interface, kind of. It's something. But now we need to start keeping score. And if we need to keep score, that means that our application now has state. And we have to keep track of that state. So far, the only state we've really kept track of has been from, play to play, what the computer and player choices have been, but now we're going to have to keep track of the wins, losses, and ties. To do that, we have to create a state container, and I will just call that score. Now, you might think that it's weird that I'm using const for something that's going to change, and you're right. It is. It's pretty dumb, but it is actually syntactically correct. And that's because when JavaScript decides what is a constant, what isn't, it really just looks at the top level thing. It doesn't do what we call deep object inspection to determine whether a thing has changed. To demonstrate that, let's come over to the console here for a second. So if I say const thing equals k v just for key value, right? And then I say thing k equals O. It doesn't care. It does not yell at me at all if I change that, right? Whereas if I say const like x equals 7, and I try to say x equals 5, it'll be like, hey, you're trying to change the constant. You can't do that. So you see, because it remains an object the entire time, it doesn't care that I'm changing the key value pairs inside of it. Wins, 0. Losses, 0. Ties, 0. And now that we have something to track our state, we have to handle that inside of our game logic down here. Right? Score.wins, which we can do, by the way, we can do the dot notation rather than the bracket notation because there's no spaces. It's a little bit easier. Score.wins plus plus. You actually have a plus plus in JavaScript, so you can increment like that. And then score.losses plus plus. And then score.ties plus plus. And without doing anything else, right, without creating the UI, let's go ahead and make sure that's all working. So it's a tie. So if I ask for score in the console, because I'm not hiding it or doing anything fun like React or anything does, I should have access to the score variable. And sure enough, I do. And you can see that ties is now 1. If I do scissors now, okay, I won. So if I ask for score again, I should see wins is 1, losses is 0, ties is 1. So my state is being tracked. Now I get to do something with it. I need to create HTML elements to track this thing. So inside of my scoreboard, I'm going to create some elements here to keep track of the score. And I'm trying to think about how crazy I want to go with the design for this for right now. Okay, not crazy for the moment. It's going to be pretty ugly because this isn't a web design session entirely. So we're going to make it, pretty ugly. And we're going to say UL. And this actually is a situation where an ID might not be a bad idea. Score tracker. So a UL is an unordered list. And an unordered list by default is going to look like bullet points. We have a list item. A class is going to be score item, and the ID is going to be score wins. And we will initialize it to 0. This is kind of cheating, but it's fine, right? It's not bound to the data at first, but it's fine. And now we're going to make this losses, make this ties. Great. And you'll see that it's not particularly attractive. But that's okay for now. We have something to keep track of what we're doing. So now that we've done that, we can actually write another function called update score. And update score, because the score is a global variable, we don't have to give it any arguments. This is not the cleanest way of state management, but it'll work for our purposes, right? Because it's not particularly complicated. I'm a big believer in most proper state management of the Redux model, where every time you have an update, you return an entirely new version of your state. You're not mutating a state that stays in place. That's next level crap. We don't need to worry about that. The TLDR is, this is a sloppier way of doing it than you would do it in a more formal functional programming paradigm. But whatever. So here we're going to basically say const const win li or winsley equals document that query selector. Damn, man. Redux gave me a headache for the longest time, and then I had an epiphany with it, and now I'm a convert. You don't have to use Redux, itself, but I've done a lot of programming in Elm, which is a crazy language. And in order to do Elm, you basically have to do... Actually, Redux was inspired by Elm. And the idea is just like there's a one-directional flow of data so that you have state, the state informs what your view shows you, and then updates go back to your state, changes the state, and the state once again updates the view. That's basically what Redux means. Meaning that you don't short circuit that loop. You don't say, my view... Yeah, I've written a lot of React Redux apps myself, and have to mail. Which is the platform you would recommend to learn to hack web apps? Pentester Lab? No. Have to mail. I would start at the Portswigger Academy. The Portswigger Web Security Academy. That's where I would start. You don't have to use Burp, by the way, to do it. I've done the entire thing with Zap, but learn the OWASP top 10 as well as you possibly can. That is going to be where I recommend you start. And then there are some courses in TryHackMe that I would also check out. Pentester Labs and also Pentester Academy, like they're fine, but I really like the content in Portswigger. They explain everything very well, and it's important to understand what they're talking about before you move beyond that. Neon, what is Redux? Whoo! What is Redux? Redux is... It's a philosophy, but it's also a code library. But the basic idea... Can you please give me a diagram for the love of God? Yeah, this is the basic idea with Redux, which is that you have a data store, which is all the state that your app uses. And your UI shows whatever the current state is. The UI can trigger events, like updating adding things, subtracting things, whatever it is. The UI updates or creates these events. The events are then sent to a dispatch, which normalizes, standardizes all of the events that your app can emit. Those events are then handled by something called a reducer. And the reducer's whole job is to create a new copy of the state with the changes that are intended by the events included in that new state. And then you have a new state. So the only thing, the big picture idea, and we're coming up on 2 minutes, 3 seconds, 2 hours, 3 minutes, fingers crossed. The only thing that ever gets to update your UI is changes in state, and the only thing that ever gets to update state is these reducers, meaning that changes to your state in your application are predictable. That is the whole point of Redux. And this looks very clean, right? But what ends up happening in any sort of serious application is that you end up writing a whole crap ton of boilerplate code for your reducers and your event handlers. So it can get very messy very quickly, which is why most people who don't like it. And I understand that. Oh, I would, yeah, Redux is a good option to use instead of Context API. So when I started doing React, the Context API was not stable, so it was never an option for me. I know that it's stabilized since then, but I would also still argue this is folks who don't know what we're talking about, like, it's fine. This is like React inside baseball. But I would also argue that the Context API encourages poor component structure because of how you have to feed data through the components. I do not like using the Context API because it makes your app messier from a predictability and logic standpoint. Okay. Yeah, Context API for small projects. That's a good way to put it. All right, back to our actual project here. So we're creating Winsley, Redux or Mobex. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but I really like the idea of Mobex. All right, so document.query selector. And what did I make this ID? It was like wins. Score wins is this ID. Notice that I'm using the hashtag because that's what the ID is targeted with. Score wins, and then we'll duplicate this a little bit. Losses li. Ah. Losses and okay. So then this is very explicit. We could loop this and be a little bit more clever with it, but it's fine. So we'll say wins li dot replace children, same like we did before, with document dot create text node. And for this, I'm going to use JavaScript's. You can do string concatenation, but I'm going to show you another trick that we have, which is with backticks, we can do wins and then $, curly braces, and then a variable name. So we'll do score.wins. And you can see how we're repeating ourselves here, and we'll clean it up in a second. And you can see I have a personal rule for programming, which is my rule of threes. By the way, we're at 2 minutes 6 seconds, or 2 hours 6 minutes, and we didn't break. So we have crushed the streaming barrier. I'm delighted. It's 3 months after I moved to this new place, and finally the streaming setup is about where I want it. But I have a rule myself, which is, of course, you don't want to repeat yourself in programming, but that rule is not supposed to be hard and fast. There are situations in which you can repeat yourself, and for me personally, I have a rule of threes. If I write something that is exactly the same twice, whatever. If I have to write it 3 times, I take that as a cue to reevaluate how I've structured my code and see if I can refactor it so that I can write the procedure one time and, parameterize it or whatever else I need to do so that I don't have to repeat myself anymore. So we're coming up to exactly that situation here with this whole structure. Right? Because we've done wins, losses, ties. But we'll get it working first, and then we'll refactor it. Oh, what'd I do wrong? Line 40. Function update score? Yeah, good. And then what's cool about doing the function that way is that we don't have to do that inside of every part of the conditional tree. We'll just do it at the bottom. That way too, of course. Right, if we wanted to do, let's refactor that real quickly. That's gonna bug me. We'll say let message, actually. We'll initialize the variable. Sorry, no, we won't. We'll declare the variable, but we won't initialize it with a value. And then we'll say here, instead of announce, we'll say message equals player victory. And that way we only have to write the call to announce one time. All right. Look at that. We have ourselves a scoreboard. All right. That is pretty much what I wanted to do tonight. Any parting questions from any folks who are hanging out about what we did or how any particular thing is working? I know this was a lot, but this video is, recorded, and it's not just recorded here, it's also recorded on YouTube, so you can check it out there as well if you need to. This isn't enough of a thing that I would put it on GitHub, honestly, but certainly I hope this is enough to get started if you're interested in playing around with this kind of thing. But yeah, so we have, 3 functions here: announce, update, score, and then, well, the event listener for the click on the buttons. And of course, you can style the buttons however you want. Oh, you did sub on YouTube? That's awesome. Thank you. But yeah, very, very good. And this is why I love rock, paper, scissors for teaching kind of this basic interaction. Right? Very simple to understand. You got some logic in there. It has everything that you want in a beginning programming project. But yeah, that is how you would do a basic web application. We'll do another one of these next Wednesday, but we'll do it from the perspective of like how you could do something wrong that an attacker could exploit. We'll try to bake in some cross-site scripting that we can mess with a little bit. Okay? So let's see if there's anybody else streaming right now that we can send everybody to. Oh, uh, Curious Jack is running. That's where we're going. All right. Well, thank you so much, friends. And Scoobwalk, thank you for the follow. Until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you on Saturday.